When the sun stretched its golden fingers across the sleepy little town of Willow Creek, most people were still tucked warmly under their blankets, but in a small brick house at the end of Maple Street, a woman named Eleanor was already awake. At 72, she had lived in that house for more than 4 decades. Its walls carried laughter, sorrow, celebrations, and quiet nights. And if there was one thing Eleanor was known for, it was the way she kept her home, spotless, welcoming, and full of life. Neighbors often joked that you could eat off the floor in Eleanor's kitchen, and no one doubted it. Eleanor believed that a clean home was more than polished wood and shining glass, it was a reflection of peace, order, and love. She always said, if the house is in harmony, the heart is lighter. Her daughter Marissa, who lived 2 towns away, sometimes teased her, "Mom, do you clean because you like it, or because you can't help yourself?" Eleanor would just smile and answer, both. Every morning began with a ritual. Long before breakfast, she opened the curtains wide and let the morning light flood the rooms. She walked slowly through her living room, her hand brushing over the sofa cushions, straightening them without even thinking. She knew every corner, every angle of her home. It was not a mansion, it was a modest 3-bedroom house with a little garden out back, but she treated it like a palace. The first habit Eleanor kept was making her bed immediately after rising. She believed that an unmade bed was an invitation to laziness. She pulled the covers taut, fluffed the pillows, and smoothed the sheets until not a wrinkle remained. It wasn't about impressing anyone, it was about setting the tone for the day. She always said, a made bed is a small victory, and victories pile up. Next, she padded softly into the kitchen, the smell of coffee already filling the air from the timer she set the night before. The counters gleamed because she never allowed dirty dishes to sit overnight. Her daughter had once asked, "Does it really matter, Mom, if the dishes wait until morning?" Eleanor had replied, "Yes, it does. Tomorrow deserves a fresh start, not leftover mess." Her neighbors often wondered how she kept her home so clean at her age. It wasn't that she had endless energy, arthritis sometimes slowed her down, and her knees ached when the weather turned, but she had cultivated habits so deeply ingrained that they required little effort. She didn't wait until things became overwhelming. Instead, she handled small tasks immediately. A crumb on the counter, wiped away in seconds. A shoe left by the door, placed neatly on the rack. Laundry, folded the moment it was dry. She called it, tidying as you go, and it was the secret no one wanted to believe was that simple. But Eleanor's story was not just about habits, it was about why she lived that way. Many years ago, when her children were young, the house had been chaotic, toys scattered across the living room, dishes piled high after dinner, laundry baskets overflowing. Back then, she had felt constantly overwhelmed. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, she sat in the middle of the mess and wept. She remembered whispering, "I can't keep up." That night, her late husband Robert had sat beside her, taken her hand, and said, "You don't have to do it all at once. Do it little by little, every day. Our home doesn't need perfection, it just needs care." Those words stayed with her long after he was gone. Now, at 72, she embodied that philosophy. Every corner of her home told the story of consistency, not bursts of energy. People often assumed she spent hours scrubbing, but in reality, she spent minutes here and there, never letting anything pile up. That morning, as she watered the potted plants on her windowsill, Eleanor thought about her neighbor, Richard. He was 75 and lived alone 2 houses down. His home was nothing like hers, cluttered, dusty, and sometimes smelling faintly of neglect. Richard often complained that cleaning was too exhausting, so he didn't bother. Eleanor cared for him in small ways, sometimes bringing him a meal, sometimes helping him tidy a little. "You don't need to live like this, Richard," she would say gently. But he only shrugged. "I'm too old to care." Eleanor always sighed because she knew it wasn't about age, it was about mindset. Later that day, Marissa came by with her 2 children, little Emma and Lucas. They burst into the house, shoes scattering, backpacks flung onto chairs, voices echoing with excitement. Eleanor smiled. She loved the noise and chaos of her grandchildren. But she also knew that once they left, she would calmly restore everything to its place. Marissa sometimes asked, "Mom, why do you bother cleaning up right after? Why not just leave it until tomorrow?" And Eleanor always gave the same answer: tomorrow's peace begins with today's order. That afternoon, Emma spilled juice on the kitchen floor. Without missing a beat, Eleanor reached for a cloth, cleaned it up, and continued her conversation as if nothing happened. To her, cleaning wasn't a chore, it was simply part of living. Her granddaughter watched and asked, "Grandma, why do you always clean so fast?" Eleanor bent down, smiled, and said, "Because if you do it right away, it never feels big." Emma giggled and nodded, though she didn't quite understand yet. Eleanor's spotless home became more than a source of pride, it became a gathering place. Her friends from church loved meeting there for tea, knowing the table would always be set neatly, the chairs dust-free, and the air faintly scented with lavender. They often asked her for advice, and she told them, "It's not about scrubbing until you're exhausted. It's about loving your home enough to care for it every day." As evening approached, Eleanor lit a small candle in the living room. She liked how the flicker reflected against the polished surfaces, making everything glow. She sat back, sipping her tea, and thought about her day. It hadn't been extraordinary, just a string of small habits performed with care, but it left her heart content. She whispered softly, "Thank you, Robert. You were right." Little by little. And so, in that small brick house at the end of Maple Street, the story of spotless living continued, not as a burden, but as a quiet testament to the power of daily habits. The following morning, Eleanor awoke before the sun, her body attuned to the rhythm of routine. She did not need an alarm clock anymore, her inner clock nudged her awake at the same time each day. The house was quiet, almost sacred, as if waiting for her to breathe life into it. She slipped into her slippers, tied her robe, and began her silent walk through the rooms. It wasn't just about checking the house, it was about connecting with it. She believed a home had a soul, and every morning she greeted it like an old friend. The hallway mirror, polished just yesterday, reflected her silver hair and warm eyes. She ran her hand along the wooden railing of the staircase, feeling the smoothness she had preserved over decades of polishing. That morning, she moved into the kitchen where the scent of brewed coffee wrapped around her like a familiar embrace. Before pouring herself a cup, she wiped down the counters. There wasn't any visible mess, but she did it anyway. "Clean surfaces, clear mind," she whispered to herself, a phrase she had adopted years ago. She then opened the windows, letting the crisp morning air drift inside. She believed that stale air bred stale energy. By the time the first golden rays broke through, her home already sparkled. It wasn't just physical cleanliness, it was emotional. When her house felt clean, she felt lighter, calmer, and ready to face the world. Later that morning, she had visitors. Her friend Margaret from across the street came over. Margaret was 68, cheerful but often overwhelmed by her own clutter. She sat at Eleanor's dining table, sipping tea, her eyes drifting across the gleaming shelves, the neatly stacked books, and the vase of fresh daisies Eleanor had placed in the center. "Ellie," Margaret sighed, "how do you do it? My house feels like it's closing in on me. I tidy up, and the very next day it's a mess again. I swear it multiplies overnight." Eleanor chuckled, her hands wrapped around her teacup. "That's because you fight with it, dear. I don't fight my home. I walk with it, a little each day. 10 minutes here, 5 minutes there. Clutter doesn't stand a chance if you don't give it time to settle." Margaret groaned. "Easier said than done." I've got closets full of things I don't even remember owning. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. That's the trick, Margaret. A spotless home isn't just about cleaning, it's about letting go. If you don't use it, if it doesn't bring you joy, you let it move on. Otherwise, it's not just your closet that's full, it's your spirit too. Margaret sat quietly, her eyes thoughtful. She knew Eleanor was right. And she also knew that Eleanor's spotless home was a reflection of her inner order, her ability to live with intention. After Margaret left, Eleanor returned to her routine. She dusted the shelves in the living room, humming softly as she moved. Dusting wasn't a chore to her, it was an act of care. Each photo frame she wiped carried memories, her wedding picture with Robert, her children's graduation portraits, and now the latest addition, a snapshot of Emma and Lucas playing in the yard. She treated these objects with tenderness, not just as possessions, but as markers of a life well lived. In the afternoon, Eleanor decided to tackle her laundry. She never let laundry pile up. A mountain of clothes is a mountain of stress, she often told her daughter. So she washed small loads frequently. As she folded the warm clothes, the rhythmic motion calmed her. Folding wasn't about getting it over with, it was a meditation of sorts. Each crease smoothed down reminded her that even the simplest acts could be meaningful if done with presence. Just as she was putting the last folded towel into the linen closet, the phone rang. It was Richard, her neighbor. His voice was weary, and he asked if she could come over. Concerned, Eleanor slipped on her shoes and walked the short distance to his house. The moment she stepped in, the difference between her home and his was stark. His living room was cluttered with newspapers, empty mugs, and laundry draped over the armchair. The air was heavy, almost suffocating. Richard, slouched in his recliner, gave her a tired smile. I just can't seem to get it together, Ellie. Eleanor's heart softened. She knew Richard struggled since his wife passed. His house mirrored his grief. She sat beside him and said gently, you don't need to clean the whole house today. Just pick one thing. Maybe clear the coffee table. Small steps, Richard. That's all it takes. He sighed, but under her encouragement, he stood and began stacking the newspapers. She helped him, chatting lightly to make it less of a burden. Within half an hour, the table was cleared, and Richard looked surprised. That wasn't so bad, he admitted. Eleanor patted his arm. See, a little each day. You don't climb mountains by leaping, you climb them by stepping. When she returned home, she felt tired but satisfied. Helping Richard reminded her why she cared so deeply about her habits. It wasn't vanity or obsession. It was about creating spaces of peace, not just for herself, but for anyone who walked through her door. That evening, as she prepared dinner, Eleanor thought about the years gone by. She remembered her own struggles when life had been overwhelming. She remembered the moment she decided she would never again let chaos control her. She realized that her spotless home was her way of reclaiming balance, of keeping sorrow from settling too deeply. After dinner, she settled into her favorite chair by the window with a book. The room glowed softly, everything in its place. She looked around and felt gratitude. The world outside might be messy, unpredictable, and sometimes cruel, but within these walls, there was order, light, and love. As she drifted toward sleep, she thought about the younger generation. She hoped that her grandchildren would one day remember not just her clean house, but the peace it carried, the lessons hidden in polished wood and tidy shelves. She whispered into the quiet, clean habits are love in motion. And with that thought, she closed her eyes, her spotless home wrapping her in comfort. The next day began with the same quiet rhythm. Eleanor rose early, her movements deliberate and calm. As she stood at the bedroom window, she looked out at her small garden. The dew on the grass shimmered, and the roses she had planted years ago bloomed proudly, their petals delicate but resilient. She smiled. Her home didn't end at the four walls, it extended to the soil, the flowers, and the little wooden bench where she often sat in the evenings. That morning, after making her bed and brewing her coffee, she tied on her apron and decided to sweep the porch. Neighbors passing by often waved, some even stopping to chat. They all knew Eleanor for her immaculate home and warm spirit. Mrs. Collins, a young mother from down the street, strolled by with her toddler in a stroller. "Good morning, Eleanor," she called. "I don't know how you do it. I can barely manage to keep the toys from swallowing my living room." Eleanor laughed softly, leaning on her broom. "It's not magic, dear. It's just habits. Put things away as soon as you're done with them. Don't let little messes grow." Mrs. Collins sighed, glancing at her little boy. "Easier said than done when you're chasing a 2-year-old. "True," Eleanor agreed, her eyes kind. "But even 5 minutes a day makes a difference. Think of it as planting seeds. Someday you'll have a whole garden of order." The young mother smiled, encouraged by Eleanor's words, and continued her walk. Eleanor resumed her sweeping, humming a hymn under her breath. Inside, her routine continued. She wiped down doorknobs and light switches, tiny details most people overlooked but she considered important. To her, cleanliness wasn't just about appearances, it was about health, care, and respect for the space she lived in. She often thought of her habits as small prayers, each act a way of saying thank you for the home she'd been blessed with. Around midday, her daughter Marissa returned, this time with groceries. "I thought I'd bring some things for you, Mom," she said, unloading bags onto the Spotless counter. Eleanor thanked her, but Marissa quickly noticed how everything already gleamed. "Mom, it's like you cleaned right before I came over." Eleanor chuckled. "No, darling, I keep it this way all the time. That way, I don't need to rush when someone visits." Marissa sighed. "I wish I could keep my house like this. Between work, kids, and errands, I can barely keep up." Eleanor touched her daughter's hand gently. "Don't think of it as one big job. Think of it as little pieces. Wipe the counters right after cooking. Fold the laundry before putting it in the basket. If you make it part of your living, it won't feel like extra work." Her daughter nodded, though her eyes held doubt. Still, she admired her mother deeply. The children, Emma and Lucas, ran into the backyard, leaving their jackets on the floor. Eleanor, without annoyance, picked them up and hung them neatly by the door. Marissa laughed. "You're quick, Mom. It's easier to do it now than to step over it later," Eleanor replied with a wink. That afternoon, Eleanor had visitors from her church group. They gathered in her living room for tea and conversation. Each woman remarked, as always, how warm and inviting her home felt. "Ellie, you make it seem effortless," one said, gazing at the shining windows and neatly arranged bookshelves. Eleanor smiled. "It is effortless, when it's a habit. You don't think about brushing your teeth, do you? This is the same. Just small acts repeated every day." The women nodded, inspired. Some admitted they dreaded cleaning, seeing it as a burden. Eleanor reassured them. "It doesn't need to be heavy. If you care for your home a little each day, it will care for you in return." Later, when the guests had gone, Eleanor sat quietly, reflecting on her words. She didn't mean them as advice only for cleaning. They were lessons about life itself. Small acts of care built strong foundations, whether for a home, a relationship, or the soul. As evening approached, she walked through the house with her soft cloth, dusting here and there. She smoothed the table runner, fluffed the pillows, and ensured the shoes by the door were neatly lined. It wasn't about perfection, it was about order and respect. She paused in the hallway, looking at the family photos. Her heart ached with missing Robert, but keeping the home they had built together spotless felt like honoring his memory. Before bed, Eleanor stood in her kitchen, hands folded loosely, looking around one last time. Everything was in its place. She felt the quiet satisfaction settle over her, the kind that only came from consistency. She thought of Richard again and hoped he had cleared another small corner of his home. She hoped Margaret had tackled one closet. She hoped her daughter had wiped the counters after dinner. And then she smiled, because she knew even if they hadn't, her example would keep echoing. She wasn't just cleaning her house, she was teaching, silently, with every polished surface and folded blanket. She was passing on a way of life. As she turned out the lights, Eleanor whispered into the darkness, "Little by little, love leaves a mark." And in the silence of her spotless home, she felt at peace. The morning sun slipped through the curtains again, but today Eleanor moved a little slower. Her knees ached more than usual, and as she sat on the edge of the bed, she whispered to herself, "Not every day is easy, but every day is worth keeping order." With practiced patience, she stood, straightened her posture, and began her first task, making her bed. Even when her body protested, she never skipped this step. To her, it wasn't just about tidiness, it was about telling herself that she still had strength and purpose. As she smoothed the sheets, she thought of Robert again. She remembered how he used to tease her, "Ellie, if we lie down tonight and mess it all up again, what's the point?" She would laugh and reply, "Because during the day, it tells us we started right." That memory warmed her as she tucked the last corner of the blanket. Today was different from most days. Her granddaughter Emma was coming to spend the afternoon with her alone. Eleanor loved these moments, not just because of the companionship, but because she saw them as opportunities to quietly pass on her values. She believed children learned more by watching than by being told. Before Emma arrived, Eleanor moved through her usual rhythm, wiping down counters, sweeping the floor, checking that the bathroom sink was clean, and setting out fresh hand towels. She always believed guests, no matter how close, deserved a welcoming space. Even family, especially family. When Emma arrived, she bounded into the house, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "Grandma," she shouted, throwing her arms around Eleanor. After settling in with cookies and milk, Emma plopped onto the sofa, scattering her pencils and notebook across the coffee table. Eleanor smiled gently. She didn't scold, she simply picked up the pencils, placed them neatly into the pencil case, and slid the notebook into a stack. Emma watched curiously. "Grandma, you don't like mess, do you?" Eleanor sat beside her. "It's not that I don't like it, dear. It's that things are happier when they're where they belong. See, now you'll know where your pencils are when you need them." Emma tilted her head. "But it takes more time." "Maybe just a few seconds more," Eleanor said with a twinkle in her eye. "But those seconds save you minutes later. Small habits, Emma. They save us in ways we don't always see." Emma thought about that while nibbling her cookie. Eleanor knew her words planted a seed. Later that afternoon, they baked together in the kitchen. Flour dusted the counters, sugar spilled, and sticky batter clung to the spoon. To a child, it was fun and careless, but Eleanor saw it as another chance to teach. As soon as the cookies went into the oven, she handed Emma a damp cloth. "Now we clean as we go," she said. Emma wrinkled her nose. "But we're not done yet." "Exactly," Eleanor replied. "If we wait until the end, the mess will feel too big. But if we do a little now, the end will feel easy." Together they wiped, rinsed, and put things away. By the time the cookies were ready, the kitchen looked almost as if nothing had happened. Emma's eyes widened. "It looks new again." Eleanor smiled softly. "That's the gift of small habits." Later, while the two of them enjoyed warm cookies and milk at the table, Emma suddenly asked, "Grandma, when I grow up, will my house look like yours?" Eleanor laughed gently. "That depends on the habits you choose, sweetheart. A house doesn't stay clean by itself. It reflects the care of the people inside it." Emma's eyes sparkled with curiosity, and Eleanor felt a wave of gratitude. Perhaps, she thought, the lessons she had carried for decades would not end with her, they would continue through her children and grandchildren. As evening drew near and Emma's parents came to take her home, Eleanor walked back through the house, restoring the little disarray left behind. She picked up crumbs from the carpet, rinsed the milk glasses, folded the blanket Emma had used on the sofa, and gently returned her home to its steady calm. When silence filled the rooms again, Eleanor sat with her tea near the window. The fading sunlight cast a golden glow across the polished surfaces. She gazed around and reflected, not on how spotless everything looked, but on what it meant. Her habits were not just about tidiness. They were about creating a sanctuary where life could be lived fully without the weight of disorder. They were about making space for love, for family, for peace. She thought again of Richard and Margaret, of her daughter juggling work and motherhood, of Mrs. Collins with her toddler, of Emma with her bright, curious eyes. Each of them was at a different stage of life, yet each could find ease if they learned the power of small, consistent habits. Before bed, Eleanor wrote a line in her journal. Something she had done for years: a clean home is not about control. It is about care, love, and gratitude. She closed the journal, placed it neatly on her nightstand, and turned off the light. The room was quiet, her heart was at peace, and her spotless home stood silently, ready to greet tomorrow with the same steady grace. The morning air carried the scent of freshly cut grass from a neighbor's yard, and Eleanor inhaled deeply as she opened her kitchen window. A soft breeze fluttered the lace curtains, bringing with it the chirping of sparrows. She paused for a moment, her hands resting on the windowsill, and let the calmness seep in. She always said mornings were sacred, they set the tone for everything that followed. After making her bed and tidying the bedroom, she moved into her daily rhythm. A cloth in one hand, she polished the wooden table in the dining room, then straightened the chairs so they sat evenly against it. She always believed that order had a ripple effect. If one thing looked right, the rest would naturally follow. Today, she expected a visitor, a young volunteer named Clara from the community center. Clara was studying social work at the university, and part of her assignment was to spend time with seniors, learning from their experiences. Eleanor smiled at the thought. She didn't see herself as a teacher, but she knew her spotless home often spoke louder than words. When Clara arrived, she stepped inside and immediately noticed the neatness. "Wow," she whispered without thinking. "It smells so fresh in here. And everything looks perfect." Eleanor chuckled softly. "It's not perfect, my dear. It's just cared for." Clara followed her into the living room, eyes wide as she took in the gleaming shelves, the polished floors, and the neatly stacked books. "It must take you hours every day to keep it this way." "Not hours," Eleanor corrected gently. "Minutes. Small habits, repeated daily, save you from needing hours later." "That's the secret." Clara tilted her head. "Could you show me?" Eleanor nodded, pleased by the curiosity. She began walking her through her simple rituals, wiping surfaces right after use, folding laundry before it piled up, putting shoes back on the rack, keeping a small basket near the stairs for things that needed to go up later. She explained each step patiently, not as rules, but as a rhythm of life. Clara scribbled notes in her little notebook, astonished. "I never thought about cleaning this way. I always wait until things get bad, and then I get overwhelmed." Eleanor's eyes softened. "That's how most people do it. But if you treat your home as a companion, you tend to it every day, just a little. It gives back peace in return." As the afternoon went on, they sat together for tea. Clara confessed, "My dorm room is a mess. I thought being busy was an excuse, but now I see maybe I just haven't built the right habits." Eleanor smiled warmly. "Habits are like seeds. You plant them now, and they grow into something strong later. Don't wait until life forces you to learn them. Start now." Later that evening, after Clara left, Eleanor reflected on their conversation. She felt a quiet joy knowing that even in her later years, she was still planting seeds in the hearts of the younger generation. Her spotless home wasn't just a reflection of herself, it was becoming a source of inspiration. But as the day wound down, Eleanor also thought of Richard. She hadn't seen him outside in days. Concern tugged at her heart. She decided she would visit him tomorrow. She knew his home carried his grief, his loneliness, and his neglect. She hoped she could help him see that caring for a home could also mean caring for oneself. Before bed, she walked her usual loop through the house, straightening the cushions, rinsing the last teacup, turning off the lights one by one. She paused in the hallway, looking at the family portraits again. Her heart swelled with both love and longing. She whispered softly into the stillness, "This home is my gift, my legacy, my way of saying thank you for all the life it has sheltered." And with that, she slipped into bed, her heart at ease, knowing that another day had passed where her small habits had left behind a trail of quiet beauty. The next morning, Eleanor dressed warmly, a soft shawl wrapped around her shoulders, and walked slowly down Maple Street toward Richard's house. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of autumn leaves. She held a small basket of muffins she had baked the night before, believing that kindness was best delivered with warmth and food. When Richard opened the door, his eyes looked tired, his hair unkempt. His living room behind him bore the same heavy clutter Eleanor had noticed before: newspapers on the sofa, dishes stacked on a side table, a thin layer of dust coating the shelves. He sighed as he let her in. "Ellie, I know what you're thinking. You don't have to say it." Eleanor placed the basket on the cleared spot of the table and smiled gently. "I'm not here to scold, Richard. I'm here to sit with you. But maybe, while we sit, we could make a little more space for light to come in." Reluctantly, he agreed, and together they began with the simplest of tasks, washing the dishes. Eleanor guided him to focus on one plate at a time, reminding him that small actions mattered more than big promises. Before long, the sink was empty, and Richard blinked as if surprised at his own effort. They moved to the newspapers, stacking them neatly for recycling. With each cleared surface, the room seemed to breathe again. Richard's shoulders relaxed, and he said softly, "It feels lighter." Eleanor nodded. A spotless home doesn't mean spotless life. But it gives you space to feel lighter inside. As the afternoon sun slanted through the window, Richard leaned back in his chair, looking at the cleaner room. His eyes watered slightly. "I've been drowning, Ellie. Since Margaret died, I let it all go. But maybe I can start again, little by little." Eleanor reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. "Yes, Richard, little by little." That evening, as she returned to her own home, Eleanor felt the familiar peace settle around her. Her house welcomed her with its calm order, shoes lined neatly by the door, the soft scent of lavender from freshly washed towels, polished frames reflecting the last rays of the sun. She moved through her nightly ritual, tidying the cushions, rinsing her teacup, folding the throw blanket on her chair. Each act felt like a conversation with the house, a promise that tomorrow would begin in peace. When she finally sat at her writing desk, she opened her journal once more. Her hand moved steadily across the page. A clean home is not about dust and polish. It is about creating space for joy, for rest, for love. These small habits are my prayers, my gratitude, my gift to those who come after me. If my children and grandchildren remember me, let them remember not just a spotless house, but the peace it carried within its walls. She closed the journal, her heart full. In the days and weeks that followed, Eleanor continued her quiet rhythm. Marissa slowly began adopting her mother's advice, teaching Emma and Lucas to pick up their toys before bed. Margaret across the street started clearing her closets one by one, inspired by Eleanor's gentle encouragement. Even Richard began taking small steps, each day a little more order returning to his home. Eleanor never boasted, never claimed credit. She simply continued living her life, her spotless habits rippling outward like rings in water, touching lives beyond her own. And so, the small brick house at the end of Maple Street remained what it had always been, a sanctuary of calm, a reflection of love, and a testament to the power of simple, consistent care. On quiet evenings, when the sun dipped low and the house glowed with the warmth of order, Eleanor would sit with her tea, smile softly, and whisper, "Little by little, peace finds its way." And in that spotless home, peace always did.